Loyola Law Dean Maria Pabon Lopez. Ms. Lopez, are you with us?
Hi, yeah, I'm Maria Pabon, professor of law at Loyola University in New Orleans.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lopez, for joining us and just giving us your perspective here. I know that things are probably very busy, and if I'm not mistaken, you're still practicing law. I know that we talked a little bit a few months ago about a separate immigration case. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're hearing right now, especially as we start to see more of these sweeps popping up across the area?
I heard that they are in Elysian Fields. I heard that they have a warehouse on Chapatulas, and that they're around Poydras, and that people are very scared.
Okay, so you've heard of additional locations that we have not, so we're going to work to confirm those. A warehouse on Chapatulas.
Right.
And you said another location in addition to that warehouse?
No, I think that I've heard that they are patrolling the ISIS on Elysian Field Street. And also that they are near Poydras, because the people who work there are pretty scared, even though they have a blue passport, which means you're a U.S. citizen.
Okay, so what are you hearing? We were talking a lot about how when this initially began, the idea was that that Border Patrol, ICE, U.S. immigration was going to go after people who had criminal convictions or were accused of a crime. What are you hearing about whether or not that is who they're actually picking up?
Oh, they're picking up anyone who looks Latino, Latinx, or Asian, or they are, and they're picking up and then asking questions later.
Okay. Tell us about the legality of that. Is that legal?
Well, here's what happens. We have that the Supreme Court denied certiorari in a case regarding what they call roving patrols. But there was one, Justice Kavanaugh, who talked about, some stop because you have a 14th Amendment right that applies to people, right? It doesn't say citizens, the Fourth Amendment. And so person, people, but they keep saying, if it's a short stop because you speak Spanish or a place where there's a lot of documented workers, maybe that could still be a case. And that wording of one Supreme Court justice seems to open the floodgate to everyone else.
Yeah,
so it's not legal, but people think it's legal and they're doing it.
Okay, we also heard some questions about this idea that there has to be a buffer around these operations, that there has to be a 25-foot buffer for people who are trying to document them. Do you know anything about the legality of that? Okay,
so I know this is First Amendment law, and I'm an immigration person, but I know enough about the First Amendment to know that the First Amendment applies to the people, and that the government has a right to restrict your speech, and your speech can include bearing witness by recording to based on time, place, and manner. But the typical example is yelling fire in a crowded theater. The government can prohibit that. How far they can go about saying you have to be 25 feet away, if it's 15, that's all up to interpretation. The Constitution is very, very simple, and then it's all interpreted in case law. So, question mark. Definitely safety comes into play, right? It's 25 feet and up. It seems wrong to me, but there you go. Does that help you?
Yeah. Yes, it certainly does. Your specialty is immigration. We're getting a little bit of reverberating feedback, I think, from our cell connection with you.
Yeah.
But when we talk about, I mentioned this earlier, the backlog of deportation hearings in the U.S., is that kind of fertile ground for what these agents are looking for, as people who are going through that process?
Well, the people who are going through the process are not, deportation hearings are still going on, but those take quite a bit of time. Like, I had someone who I helped starting in January, February last year, and she wasn't deported until, and she agreed to be deported in the summer. So people who are awaiting deportation typically know when they're supposed to go or have chosen what is called voluntary departure. So I think what they're doing is they're penalizing people for exercising their rights. I know they're trying to, and picking up people who have pending applications for lawful permanent residency, but because they had an entry or that they overstayed a visa, the fact that you're married to a U.S. citizen doesn't allow you to avoid being picked up by ICE if they find you.
Can you tell me more about the green card process? I know that there are some people that have been
Sure.
here who have been holding green cards for some time, hoping to become citizens.
Right.
Is
Well,
that still a
green cards
viable
are
push?
indefinite. Green cards are, they're not like red, white, and blue.
Okay.
And they're called permanent resident cards. And you can be a permanent resident of the United States once you get that status through either family or employment based or through later on asylum. You can keep it for a long time, forever. Now, that doesn't mean that if you don't have a DUI, get into trouble, you couldn't be deported. So the only way to ensure you won't be deported if you're a naturalized citizen is by becoming a citizen. And you can become a citizen between 3 and 5 years after being a permanent resident.
Okay, so you have to go through that sort of documentation process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about the people who are awaiting those deportation hearings? I mean, you mentioned a year and a half. Is that a typical time frame?
Something like that, because people who are awaiting their deportation hearing use as a defense. I mean, the reason they stick around to have a deportation hearing is because there's like for example, me as a pro bono attorney, when I advise them, you must have a valid defense. Like, if you remove me from the U.S., I will be killed in my country. I have a few of those kinds of cases. So the defense to the deportation is, if you remove me, I'm going to be killed. And so you have a hearing on that, right? But it's not that people just, I'm going to wait until a judge finds me and deports me. No, I mean, if they consult with an attorney, and there's a whole list, Unión Migrante has a bunch of lists of potential attorneys, people will find out because I would tell you, by and large, the majority of the Latinx, Asian, Caribbean, African, all these immigrants are here because they have to. Right? Because the conditions in their country, like Haiti just fell apart, and now they're going to start returning them. They canceled the temporary protected status for the Haitians because they said it's not in the nation's interest, even though they know they're going to be subject to having a lawless government. I think the guy's called Barbecue, the gang member who runs Haiti.
Yes.
So tell me this, and I'm glad that you mentioned the other nationalities that are here, because I know that we tend to focus on the Hispanic and the Latinx community. Can you talk about, is there anyone else here specifically within our region who you've heard about or who you've heard about being picked up by some of the ICE or Border Patrol agents?
I know definitely people who have African descendants.
African.
Right. So, for example, the Garifunas, who are Hondurans but are Afro descendants, they're getting picked up in larger proportions. They're Hondurans, but they have the African background. They're getting picked up in huge numbers, right? Because they are profiled based on what they look like. I know there's been, I just attended a presentation yesterday about people who are really, 2 days ago. The Vietnamese population is pretty scared because some of those came after helping the U.S. government in Vietnam. And then what happened was some of the younger generations who were brought here didn't become citizens and then just kind of forgot about it. I also heard about an Iranian woman who they had put away, remember, earlier this year?
Yeah, we covered that.
So, yeah. So the point is, the assumption that who's getting picked up right now is a quote-unquote criminal alien is just not true. They're picking up anyone they can because they want to wake those numbers, the number of immigration arrests and deportations. And there's no reason to do that. There is a whole orderly immigration system, and that big, beautiful bill gave money for more agents, but it didn't give more money, that I understand, for judges or for all the other things that you need in an immigration adjudication system.
Yeah, which is the reason for that backlog that I keep bringing up, because it's, millions of people long waiting to go through that process. And I think, there are questions about how quickly this is all moving, given that those people have been waiting for some of them up to a decade, right?
Yes. Some of the people that have been picked up, I don't know if you're representing them. Can you take us through this process? Are they immediately being deported? Are they being detained?
No, they're all being detained.
They're being detained. So what's the process?
Well, typically, for example, I'll give you an example. The first one, the one that I told, she was driving without a license because, under the law, they don't want to allow driver's licenses to be had by people without papers, although 19 states have driver's license, because driving doesn't really correlate to your status. It correlates whether you can drive or not. But anyway, she got picked up. she was someone who did nails as an independent contractor. So she really wasn't violating immigration law by working because she just worked from her home. But I think she had an expired visa or had come across the border. I forget, one of those two ways. The typical way, you come in with a coyote, or you have a visa that expired. Neither of them are particularly lawless, right? One is you let a visa expire, and one is you left your country because you're fearing persecution. So anyway, this woman, Garifuna Honduran, is driving, gets picked up in one of the, I don't know if it was I-10 or which, and they picked her up and they put her in jail, and she was there, and she had a U.S. citizen daughter too, who just recently got sent. She was deported eventually after we looked and saw that there were no relief for deportation. And then the poor U.S. citizen little daughter had to stay with an aunt. This person had a U.S. citizen sister, but the wait for U.S. citizen siblings is like 20-some years
Wow.
when they apply for ULA.
Yeah, that was one of my big questions, was what happens to the families of these people? Because many of them have U.S. citizen children, like you mentioned.
Right. Oh, this woman who I'm telling you her story, she had a U.S. citizen sibling, and that's in the 20 years range for them to ask for you, and a U.S. citizen child that can only ask for you if the child is already over 18 or 21. But my poor client got detained in jail. And right now they're even detaining in Angola, which they didn't use. And I understand they're using the people who are undocumented who are detained in Angola to pick because they're not citizens, and it's believed that they don't have to be paid. That's what I understand.
My other question was about women. Where are women being taken? Are they being taken to the same facilities as men?
Women. My client, if I recall correctly, was in just a regular jail in, I forget which parish. And I think if it's a small enough facility, they can segregate them. I don't know. And so I can give you names if you want of people who are more on the ground, because I just hear sort of to the legal. I don't hear on those kinds of specifics. But I will tell you what I know about these detention facilities. There's very little by way of medication. I just heard about a case. It wasn't here in Venice, but in California or where? Arizona. The judge said they had 48 hours to give you a blanket, or one of those aluminum blankets, you know? So for 2 days, people have to be in the cold. I'm like, really? Anyway, sorry, I know this is...
If you can you tell me more just about, you said they get detained. They're not, does a legal process play out? Are they able to, I know that you probably are overwhelmed with the number of clients that because if I'm not mistaken, there are not many immigration attorneys that are within the state of Louisiana. Are they detained and there's a legal process that plays out? Or
the first legal process, yes, is that you ask for a bond for them, but they only can get a bond if this administration has interpreted that people who have overstayed a visa or who have come in with a coyote, they are not eligible. That's not, in my view, and in the previous view of the other administrations, because immigration law is very much like a lot of discretion of the agency. It used to be that you could get a bond. Now it's very hard. But once you got a bond, you then help prepare for your deportation case. If you don't have a bond, you sit there. I have another person who's been sitting there since January, and he's still there because we're appealing his case. So January, and we are now in December, almost a year.
And he's been sitting in jail that whole time.
Jail or detention facility. Usually what happens is they pick him up, put him in jail, and then ICE picks them up if the local police got him, right? The sheriff, whatever. But yeah, then they're in a detention facility. We have 8. We're the second largest detention place in the United States for undocumented after Texas.
Yes.
Okay, and that obviously has expanded recently with Camp J, as you mentioned, at Angola, now being used for immigration detention. But I just want to make a point real quick. Jeff Landry posted on X about 13 minutes ago, the governor saying, entering this country illegally, I'm just reading here, doesn't make you immune from the law. If you commit crimes here, you face consequences, just like any citizen who breaks the law. Louisiana will not be a refuge for violent offenders. We stand with our federal partners and the law enforcement officers who protect our people every day. He then goes on to thank thanked President Trump and Secretary Noem for ensuring Louisiana has the resources and coordination to keep residents safe. And then Kristi Noem replied, the men and women of DHS law enforcement have landed in the Big Easy. Operation Catahoula Crunch, as they're calling it, will remove the worst of the worst from New Orleans, Louisiana, after the city's sanctuary politicians have ignored the rule of law. Law and order will prevail. Now, talk about the sanctuary city part of this and that piece. Obviously, that is a political touch point here.
Sure, but let me say, immigration law, by definition, since the Supreme Court in many years, is federal law. So the immigration system is controlled by the federal government. Each state can decide whom they want in their state and what their immigration status is. It doesn't mean a state can grant an immigration status, but it means if you're coming here, you don't have the papers, but we need your work, particularly if they're not violent, because part of the violation of immigration law would be working with our organization. But working means you have an employer and a company. If it's just you're an independent contractor, you're not really doing that violation of immigration law. Then the states can decide then to, I'm not going to cooperate with ICE, and they get called sanctuary city, but there's no provision of the law that says, I'm a sanctuary city. It's just, I don't cooperate with the federal government, because to be perfectly honest, it's an unfunded mandate. Right?
Yes.
They're not helping the local. The only where people are making money is in detention, right? Because those detainees, the federal government pays local. But so far as I know, getting more people on the street. We can use help always in the sense of safety for everyone. You know how it is in the French Quarter, but that has nothing to do with citizenship status and much more to do with socioeconomic and racial issues.
Yeah, I think my question here about us being the city of New Orleans being a sanctuary city is what happens when someone is accused of a crime, first arrested, second convicted. When we hear the Department of Homeland Security saying that we picked up this list of people who are dangerous criminals who've been in Louisiana and who have been let go by local jails.
Right.
What are we talking about there? Do you have any sense of that?
Yes. So, because again, immigration law is federal law. So if you have state criminal charges, typically you get picked up by the state police and the state or sheriff, and then they put you through the process through state, like anyone would, right, for any kind of
anytime anyone commits a crime. Yeah,
right. And typically then they notify ICE, and over time it's evolved that a lot of state agencies are notifying ICE immediately, and instead of having to just prosecute them, they get them removed, because you don't have to be convicted of a crime to be removed. The U.S. law that passed, what was the name of the young woman? It was the first law that President Trump signed. I forget her name, but that law, that law says that you're deportable even if you're accused of a crime of turpitude and violence and all that.
So
that's the only one that's changed.
Okay, so right now we're trying to, confirm this list of people who, Department of Homeland Security, Paul Murphy, let me borrow his phone there, this list of people who Homeland Security says that it picked up. We're trying to figure out whether or not those are people who have actually been convicted of crimes, or if they're still awaiting trial.
They pick up they're concerned, they're picking up anyone who's not a U.S. citizen. They could even be LPRs or citizens. There's lawsuits of U.S. citizens being picked up and held for 2 days, even though they were proving that they were citizenships.
But when we politically hear them saying, these people were let go by law enforcement, that could just be a bond, right? Like that they could have bonded
out.
out?
Go back to their hearings.
Okay.
What we have is, typically, what we have is people coming to immigration and then getting arrested.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I was going to ask you that. You have a lot of people who are coming to their appointments and going through the process. Are we seeing a lot of people who are not showing up, and that's leading to them being arrested because of the fear of something happening when they get to court?
Well, that's the thing. You are putting the immigrant in an impossible situation. Either you comply, you came here, your visa expired, or you came with a coyote, and you're fearing persecution. You filed for it. Yeah, Lake and Riley, that's the name of the law. The only law that's changed, the Lake and Riley Act. So if you come and you ask for asylum, and it takes a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years to have your hearing, typical practice is you get a work permit, and you stay here, working until they can adjudicate whether you have a valid asylum claim.
Okay.
But if they pick you up and put you in detention because you're here with no papers or expired visa, so the asylum application, it's Form I-589, is not a granting status of anything except that you can work, and it used to be you could stick around, but now they're interpreting it differently.
Okay,
And
so
they
that's and there's just a lot of latitude in immigration law, right? I mean, that's really the big concern is that we feel it also almost seems like we're playing by an unspecified set of rules at this point.
Yes, it certainly is. And I think that's I think that's what's the confusing part. I know that there is the law, there are a certain number of rules, there are certain limitations as to who they can pick up, who they can go for, and it feels like it's all being thrown out of the window and everyone is being picked up and being swept up in something.
When you have when you have no enforcement priorities, you're just picking up everyone indiscriminately. That's when the really bad people have the resources to hide, right? The big cartels, the big human traffickers, those will not be the ones that are going to pick up in these indiscriminate sweeps. Those know where to hide, and they do it.
Right, understandable. All right, Miss Maria Pabon Lopez, she's at Loyola Law School, professor there. Thank you so much for giving us your insight.
You're welcome.
Hopefully you can stand by, because obviously this is a lot of moving parts. You can't see it here, but there's a lot of moving parts behind the scenes in the studio right now as we cover this, and this is a story that continues to unfold. So thank you so much for giving us your insight.